two things can be true at the same time. You can have had a beautiful life filled with privileges and advantages and safety that so many people in this world do not have access to. That can be true. But at the same time, you can also have experienced your own pain, your own struggles, your own heartbreaks that have deeply, deeply affected you, that have kept you in this place of sadness and disconnection from yourself and feeling like there's something wrong under the surface, but you can't quite get to the bottom of it. And so you just try day after day to focus on the positive and bring yourself into that high vibration. And in that place, we just get stuck. Welcome to the Rituals with Micaela podcast, a space for you to come as you are and tune into conversations that will support you on your path to becoming all that you're meant to be in this lifetime. I'm Micaela, a hypnotherapist and spiritual mentor. Daily rituals have been the most transformative tool in my healing and manifestation journey, and I want to share every piece of that wisdom with you. Think of this podcast as a weekly ritual for you to cultivate deeper awareness, inspiration, and connection to yourself. And most importantly, every episode will leave you with a simple ritual to integrate and embody everything you've learned. Whether you listen with your morning coffee, on your drive to work, or while you move your body, wherever you are, just take a deep breath, tune in, and turn this into your own special time just for you. Hi, my loves. Welcome back to my podcast and my YouTube channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Micaela, and I'm a hypnotherapist and spiritual mentor. And right now, I'm really passionate about sharing what's going on in my own personal healing journey to get a little bit vulnerable and hopefully make some of you guys feel less alone and like maybe you can see parts of yourself in my story. Maybe you can validate yourself a little bit more. And at the end of every single episode, I will leave you with some rituals, some tools that I have personally used to help me to move through these experiences. So today is an episode that honestly is very vulnerable and pretty scary to put out there. This episode is going to be about how important it is to learn how to validate your own experiences and acknowledge the trauma that you went through, no matter how it compares to somebody else. And as I was writing down this message and really getting clear on what I wanted to share, I got a very, very loud confirmation through a comment from somebody who commented on one of my old videos saying, "Oh my God, first world problems." As soon as I got this comment, I was reminded how scripted we are, how conditioned we are to compare our experiences to other people's and talk ourselves out of these feelings that we have just because in comparison to somebody else, it doesn't seem that severe. It doesn't seem that important. And in that moment, I realized that this is literally what creates so much collective pain and anger and violence within humanity is our own suppression of how we feel, telling ourselves that we're not valid, talking ourselves out of our feelings, trying to just stuff them away because, like I said, in comparison to other people in the world, it shouldn't really be affecting you. But the truth is that if it is affecting you or if it did affect you in some way, it is really worth acknowledging and giving yourself what you need and validating yourself, because that is how you move those emotions through you and process them so that you can actually truly let them go. That's what we want. We don't want to be identified with our trauma or with these past experiences. But when we shut them away and when we tell ourselves that we are not valid for having felt the way that we feel, it's like we don't do anything with that energy. It just gets stuck. So when I got that comment, it really lit a fire within me to share about this and to put myself out there in this vulnerable way, knowing that there could be people who disagree with me on this one. But I would challenge you, if you're here listening to this message and you feel like you disagree with me, to really notice that conditioning of believing that two things can't be true at the same time. And what I mean by that is that, yes, your life could have been very privileged. My life was very privileged in a lot of ways. And at the very same time, your life could be filled with so much pain. There could be someone who grew up with millions and millions of dollars, but maybe they didn't have love or maybe they didn't have connection. that in itself is a trauma. Or maybe there's someone who grew up with parents that loved them so much, but those parents were working through their own trauma, or those parents experienced trauma in their lives that they hadn't really been able to process. And the child growing up with that love still felt that pain and didn't know how to explain it. So I'm going off into all these random examples because I want you to see that there can be multiple truths that exist at once. And so if you had a life where you feel like you were privileged and you had so many things that other kids around you didn't have or other people around you didn't have, yet you still felt this sadness and this pain within you, this episode is absolutely for you because I can relate to that so much. For me, I absolutely grew up with privilege in so many ways, and I am able to acknowledge that. And I'm also able to see that when I talk myself out of my feelings, I'm unable to use that privilege to my benefit, to be able to feel deserving of it, first of all, and also use that energy and that, advantage that I have to contribute positively to humanity. In order to get there and to have that energy and that strength to do that, I have to feel wholeness within myself. I have to feel validated within myself. And for so long, I haven't felt that way because there has been this coexistence of privilege and love and also pain and suffering in my life. And I didn't want to acknowledge the pain and suffering. So I first want to start off by sharing this definition of trauma that helped me to really understand that trauma is a subjective experience. It's not for somebody else outside of you to determine, oh, that's a first world problem. Oh, you should just get over it. Oh, there's somebody else out there that has it worse. Absolutely, that could be true. And you could be suffering at the same time from that experience. What happens is when we're able to acknowledge that suffering and when we're able to hold ourselves in it, like I said in the beginning, we're able to transmute it and free ourselves from it so that we can focus on making this world a better place. So the definition that I want to share is that trauma is a result from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So as you hear that definition, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you can think of multiple experiences you had in your life that would be considered traumatic, experiences that had lasting effects on your well-being. And I feel like the word trauma makes a lot of us want to run away from it, right? It's like we don't want to identify as this traumatized person because sometimes that can make us feel powerless. And that's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is actually to make you feel powerful and to help you to realize how important it is to validate your own experiences so that you can step into your full power and stop letting them have control over you. But in order to do that, we have to find this balance between acknowledging, processing, feeling these experiences and knowing that, it's okay that they affected us in the way that they did, even if we've told ourselves our whole life that they weren't severe enough to have that impact, while also knowing that we don't have to identify with those experiences anymore. We have the power as an adult now to write our own stories and to give ourselves what we need while also choosing to move on and move forward. But we really cannot move forward when we're in denial of what we're feeling and what has happened to us. So I think the best way for me to explain what led me to want to talk about this is some realizations that I had about my own personal experiences. I have been in denial of my own trauma, my own struggles for so much of my life. I was sitting with myself the other day and holding myself and just feeling this heaviness and this sadness that has been with me for quite a long time. I've tried to just be grateful. I've tried to just focus on the positive. I've tried to just focus on all of those incredible privileges and advantages that I had access to and tune out this sadness within me. And that has literally never worked for me. And so what that tells me is that there are emotions that need to be felt and feelings that need to be validated within me. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what it's like to be a vicarious survivor of trauma. And what this means is having people that you're very close to, whether it's friends or a parent or family members that have experienced trauma. And all you feel as a child or all you feel in your relationship with them is this silent pain and suffering of somebody that you love, watching someone that you love struggle with something and feeling completely powerless to be able to help them. And what this created within me is this need to overanalyze, walk on eggshells, figure out how I can make everyone around me feel comfortable, feel loved, feel happy, and feeling responsible for other people's feelings. And something that came to me the other day was thinking about what it feels like to imagine yourself suffering, to imagine yourself, being injured or hurt by somebody else versus imagining someone you love experiencing that. I don't know about you, but for me, imagining somebody that I deeply, deeply love being hurt in any way, being traumatized in any way, that sends some of the deepest pain through me when I imagine that. And of course, I care about myself and want to protect myself, but it's a different level of pain when we imagine someone we love going through that. And that's not to take away from anybody's personal experience with trauma, but I think some of the most silent victims of trauma are people who watch someone they love being traumatized or feel that someone they love has been hurt or is struggling in some way that we literally have no control over. And learning how to validate that experience without saying, well, that person had it worse than me. They're the ones that actually experienced it. Yes, they experienced it, but so did you. And it's time to really learn how to hold yourself in that and understand that there is a part of you that is maybe constantly looking for how you can help everybody else in the world but yourself. Help your partner now, maybe, or your children or your family or whatever it is. Maybe that is your trauma response, to be a savior for somebody else because you feel so out of control watching people that you love suffering. There are actual books written about being a vicarious survivor of abuse or trauma, and I think it's something to really pay attention to if that's something that you went through in your own life, to stop telling yourself that you are the one that had it easy. Maybe you had it easier in some ways, and you also had it harder in other ways because you felt so out of control in being able to protect and save somebody that you loved. So that is the first one that I want to share personally that will hopefully make some of you feel a little bit more validated in your experience. The next point that I want to talk about is simply the trauma of coming into a world that is so dysfunctional and that is so unnatural for us. I feel like I remember as a kid looking around and thinking, why is this so wrong? Why does this feel so wrong? Why does everyone have to work so much? Why does everyone have to struggle so much to get their basic needs met? Why does it feel like everyone around me is in survival mode? Why do I have to be sitting still in these classrooms all day learning about these subjects that I don't want to learn about? It's like there's so many things that are off about the world that we live in that rip us away from our natural state of peace and joy within ourselves. And we become these people who are focused on achieving and doing rather than figuring out who we are, what we want, what we're meant to contribute to the world. And it goes on for the rest of our lives until we really catch ourselves in that. And then when we catch ourselves in that, being able to acknowledge how painful it was to be ripped away from your intuition, from your joy, from your freedom, and put into this world where you had to fight for your survival and fight for your success and ability to feel loved and validated by the world, that in itself is a painful trauma, at least for me, that I had to acknowledge and that I had to say, okay, this is valid, that even just being alive and being born into this world in itself is traumatic. Another personal one for me has been my internal struggle with body image throughout my life. This was a symptom of the trauma that I experienced and the many instances where I felt pulled away from myself, where I felt like I had to dim my light to fit in and survive in the world. And I felt like I had to be like everyone else. And I was experiencing all these dark and heavy and painful emotions, but didn't know where they were coming from. And I was just looking for something to make me feel like I was in control and like I could feel pleasure and joy again. And so it began this long and silent struggle in my own body where I was binge eating and addicted to food and using that to give me that source of pleasure that I felt cut off from. And in my head, I remember feeling so much shame about the way that my body looked and dealing with this silent struggle that pulled me out of the present moment, that pulled me away from myself, that pulled me away from experiencing joy and being confident within myself. And for those of you who have struggled with body image or eating disorders in your life, you know that it is one of the most silent monsters of all time. It's this silent monster that takes over every single moment of every single day. It is so hard to get away from it because you literally live in your body. You know, you can't get away from the struggle of being at war with yourself, constantly trying to restrict yourself, constantly feeling uncomfortable in your own skin. And so these are just a few of the experiences that I've identified in my life that I would consider to be traumatic and worth validating and worth holding myself in. And I think also one more that I would love to add in is when it comes to being angry with your parents or guardians. Some of us have a easier time with this than others. For me, I've had a really hard time with being angry towards my parents because there's love and there's rage. There's compassion and there's so much anger and sadness. And it's so hard to let both of those emotions exist at the same time. But what I have found is that when I don't let myself feel that rage and that anger and validate my inner child who felt neglected and misunderstood and was waiting for somebody to come and get her and show her the way and help her to feel supported, when I don't acknowledge that, the rage and the anger gets taken out on my relationship with them. I don't feel like I'm fully able to be in that love and compassion towards them because I haven't let myself feel or validate that experience. So if you feel like your relationship with your parents or guardians, caregivers are tumultuous, it's time to acknowledge and let yourself process and feel that rage and that sadness, even if they did support you in so many ways, even if they were doing the very best they could, and you can acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge yourself before you can have that fully healing relationship with them, that relationship that you likely probably want to have with them. And, maybe that's not your goal. Maybe you don't want to have that relationship with them, but this is really just for the people who feel like you want to have that relationship with your parents or your caretakers, but for some reason you can't get yourself to fully be on board with that. That's because there are parts of you that are still angry, that still feel abandoned, neglected, or unloved in some way, unsafe in some way. So what happens when we actually start to validate ourselves, and what does this even look like? Well, I have some rituals that I'll link in the description box to help you to do this, but really what this looks like is writing out from your perspective what it was like to be you, without saying, oh, but this person did this because they went through that trauma. And this is part of what's so hard about being this empathetic and compassionate and understanding person. For me, it's like I'm able to understand that there's really just people who are hurt, who are taking out that hurt and reacting from that hurt and creating more of it. And it's like that can make it so hard to validate your own experience. So it's important to pull yourself out of that and just be with you. Focus on you first. Focus on what these experiences felt like in your body when you went to school and you were bullied for the first time, when you were hurt in your first relationship or cheated on, or this or that happened between you and your family. What was that experience like for you? not what it was like for anyone else, not trying to talk yourself out of it or comparing it to other people who had it worse. Feel into that experience. And for me, I will write this out and just catch myself if I'm trying to talk myself out of it and let myself cry and process it. Sometimes I'll have conversations with myself where I speak this out loud and I hold myself, and I have a meditation that can guide you through how to do that. But that's really what this process looks like. And what happens is when we're able to validate our experiences, when we're able to feel our full spectrum of emotions and know that those feelings are valid, we start to move this energy through us. We start to feel lighter. We start to feel that darkness, that dark cloud that I had hanging over my head every single morning, filling me with dread. It starts to go away. We start to feel lighter. We start to feel more connected to ourselves. We start to feel like we are more empowered in the action that we're taking. And we start to feel like we can forgive. We can forgive and let go of this old energy that we don't need to hold on to anymore. We don't need to identify with this trauma or this old story of feeling like we don't belong in the world, or that we're always abandoned or neglected, or whatever your story is. We don't have to identify with that anymore as soon as we're able to give ourselves what we needed at the time. This is a part of the process of coming home to yourself and creating this wholeness and fullness within you. What happens when we don't do this work? What happens when we continue to invalidate ourselves and our own experiences? Well, first of all, we will attract people who mirror that to us. We will attract people who gaslight us when we're feeling certain ways, and it's mostly because we're doing it to ourselves. Everything is a mirror, right? So if you have relationships in your life where you feel like people are invalidating your experiences, where you don't feel honored, where you feel like you're being gaslit, it's probably because you are invalidating your own experiences on some level. And the other thing that I see that's really common for, those of us who have learned to talk ourselves out of how we feel is that we will accept mediocrity in our lives. We will accept things being just okay, good on paper, right? Because that's the mirror of, well, everything in my life was good on paper. I had all of these privileges. I had all of these advantages. I had a safe home. I had food on the table. I had love in my life. What more could I ask for? That type of mentality that denies the hard and denies the things that feel off. And so what you'll find is when you're in this space of denying your own experiences, denying what happened to you, you will also deny the part of you that feels unfulfilled in your life. You won't listen to that little voice within you that says, we deserve a better job. We deserve a better relationship. We deserve friends that we can trust and rely on. And we deserve unconditional love or princess treatment or whatever it is that you have secretly been wanting to call into your life that you feel like you're not deserving of. That's how that will play out. It's like your denial of your own feelings will lead you to deny when something in your life feels off, and you'll settle. You'll settle for things that aren't meant for you. And that will come with a lot of lessons that try to get you to go on this new path, to validate yourself, to feel your feelings. But if you keep denying that you even feel them in the first place, you're not going to be able to process them, and you're not going to be able to acknowledge that your life isn't how you want it to feel, that it's not how you want it to look. And you probably won't be able to get the courage to do anything about it until you really are able to acknowledge and validate your own story and your own experiences. So in this moment, I want you to remember what I said. Two things can be true at the same time. You can have had a beautiful life filled with privileges and advantages and safety that so many people in this world do not have access to. That can be true. But at the same time, you can also have experienced your own pain, your own struggles, your own heartbreaks that have deeply, deeply affected you, that have kept you in this place of sadness and disconnection from yourself and feeling like there's something wrong under the surface, but you can't quite get to the bottom of it. And so you just try day after day to focus on the positive and bring yourself into that high vibration. And in that place, we just get stuck. So, like I said, two things can be true at the same time. you can have experienced a joyful life and a painful life. And the more that you can acknowledge your pain with love, acceptance, and compassion without having to compare it to anybody else, without denying that it exists, you can bring that back in to that love and to that wholeness and start to feel safe enough to go after what you want in life. And something I want to touch on even further is why this is so essential if you had privilege, if you had advantages that other people didn't have. If you try to deny the way that you felt, you will never be able to use those privileges to your advantage to make an actual difference in the world. So much of the pain in our world, so much of the violence and what we see going on collectively right now is the suppression of our own experiences, the denial of our trauma, the denial of how we feel. And so individually, if you want to feel like you're using your privilege and your advantages for good and for the collective healing of humanity, it starts within you, coming into wholeness within yourself, so that you can start to take action from wholeness, from love, and from a place that's really deeply in alignment with your soul mission and your soul purpose, which will shift the collective consciousness, which will shift the vibration of humanity when you start to do this. So I think that's something that holds so many of us back, is we think it's selfish to focus on doing our own inner work, and we should be going and volunteering and doing these things. And absolutely, we should be doing that. But we need to be doing that from a place of wholeness, from a place of overflow, from a place of love within ourselves. And we can only do that when we feel at home within ourselves, when we feel that wholeness, when we acknowledge our own pain. That's when we can really start to hold space for other people without depleting ourselves completely or exhausting ourselves, draining ourselves of our energy, which usually comes from a place of feeling undeserving of the privileges that you've had. And the world will not become a better place by you denying those privileges, by you not using them to your advantage. It's time to use those resources that you have, that safety that you have in your life, to be able to heal and come home to yourself so that you can actually make a real difference in the world. So the ritual that I want to leave you with is a journal. To write about the experiences in your life that pulled you away from your joy. Minor experiences, whatever you can remember. It could be a year ago, it could be 20 years ago. Some of us don't really remember everything from our childhood, and that's okay. Remember that anything that's unresolved from your childhood will show up in your adult life in other ways. So you could even notice right now the experiences that you're having that make you feel ripped away from yourself, that make you feel emotionally, mentally, or spiritually unstable, and start to give yourself what you need. I highly suggest, if you can remember, working through these memories from your childhood, things that you maybe talked yourself out of being traumatic because they weren't in comparison to someone else, or maybe you literally had a caretaker tell you, oh, you really don't have it that bad. I know so many of us have had that experience where we've literally been told to invalidate our own experiences by the people that we're meant to look up to. So free write about those experiences, hold yourself, hug yourself if emotions come up. If they're not coming up, it might be because you need somebody else to hold that space with you and to validate your own experience with you. So I highly recommend finding someone who can hold that space with you, because that has been really helpful for me in being able to do this work on my own. I really wasn't able to even process any emotions by myself for a long time. But if you do feel like journaling can evoke those emotions within you, absolutely do that. And my hope is that you will really remember that one important truth that I shared, which is that multiple truths can exist at the same time. Multiple experiences can exist at the same time. You can have had a beautiful life and a painful life, and your life could have been objectively easier than somebody else's, but still have impacted you in a really intense way. And it's time to acknowledge that, process that, and let yourself feel it so that you can fully let it go and move on to the life that you know you're meant to have. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, for being here on my channel or on my podcast. I'm so grateful for every single one of you who has joined my community and for creating this safe container for me to start opening up, because I know so many of you are on this same soul path as me, and I'm just so grateful to have you here. So if this message resonated with you, please feel free to comment below and let me know what the most impactful part of it was and how you're going to start nurturing yourself and validating yourself more from here on out. Sending you so much love, and I will see you in the next one.